In this video we're going to be going over a technique where we can create nice bendy limb bones for cat rigs. It's actually a technique that you could use on any rigging in Max, but cat rigs are so much better to work with, so we're going to be using them. What we'd like to do is create a bendy arm, which instead of using a straight arm we'd like to make a nice cartoony bendy arm. So we're going to create an arm with four segments, and it's actually going to be a cat rig arm that's being driven, that is driving a spline arm. So let's start by creating the spline that we're going to be using. The spline that we should use is a NURBS CV curve with 4 control vertices in it. So here's the spline that we're going to be using, and the first thing we should do is go to the modifier panel and add a special modifier to this guy called the Spline IK control. If we press on Create Helpers, we end up with 4 point helpers which control the spline. So if we move any of these point helpers around, we can see that the spline is being driven by the point helpers. So what we're going to do is grab this guy and link him to that guy, and then unlink him. So now we can move any points, and that behaves very much like a Bezier spline. So the next part of this tutorial, we go back and create some point objects. We're going to create 4 point objects, or actually we're going to create 3 because we want 4 bones that go along the length of the spline. So let's start by doing this. What we're going to do first of all is just create 1, and to save time we're going to create a put him on this path straight away, path constraint. Add him to the path, and we're just going to slide him down the path a little bit and resize it. Now delete the 2 keyframes that come automatically on the path constraint, so that make sure he doesn't move anywhere, and then holding down shift we're just going to slide him along. Okay, we can instance this point, and there we have it. We have 4 points now. So as we move these control points, our spline is moving and our points are on that path. So now we want to create a set of max bones. We're going to just create 4 max bones that are going to be the bones that we actually use to drive our skin mesh. So this is the process that gets a little bit tedious, but we're going to apply a whole lot of constraints. So let's start by assigning let's open up the curve editor. Okay, so on this guy, I'm kind of old school. I tend to always use the menus, the curve editor to assign controllers rather than these things. So I'm going to assign a position constraint, and in the user interface we're going to add the first bone on that spline as our position object, and then we're going to select this guy and do much a similar thing. Assign controller position constraint. We can actually do this in here. Okay, add position target, make the second one, select this, oops, delete that, select this bone and constrain him to the 3rd point. Oops, I've done that again. Okay, now, and the last bone we're going to position constrain to the last bone here, the last point helper. Now this nub object, nub bone, we're just going to position constrain right to the end bone. Okay, so what we have now is as we move this spline, we've got a bunch of bones that are stretching along the spline, and what we need to complete this is some look at constraints. So we're going to select, go to the rotation channel and add some look at constraints, add a look at constraint, and add the target for this guy is the null that the point helper that his child was linked to. So we're going to go down the chain and do this all again. Look at, add look at target, look at constraint, add look at target, look at constraint, add look at target. So when we move this bone now, we can see we have a bunch of bones that are stretching along it. So at this point we have one bone that we would like to use as the bone that we use for skinning. So what we should do is select the first bone in our chain and just use the align tool to snap it to the shoulder joint on our cat rig. Pivot point to pivot point, and we should have it there. Let's just see what orientation does. Okay, apply. Now we're just going to rotate it, turn on angle snaps, and go to local, and rotate it down by exactly 90 degrees. Move this guy in parent space or local space up there. Okay. Actually, we could make these guys all a little bit smaller. In fact, if we select the spline, it can do it for us. Okay, so the next two splines we need to work with are these two. Select this one and use the align tool once again to align it to the elbow joint, and orientation as well. Okay, and we're going to use the tool to rotate it back around by exactly 90 degrees, and we're going to grab this guy and pull him back. Now there's a lot of lines being drawn in the viewport, and those are all drawn by the lookats. So what we need to do is come here and for each of the lookats we're just going to turn that off because it's very distracting. Okay, now what I'm actually going to do is we're going to link this guy just onto the cat bone, and we're going to link this guy onto the shoulder bone. So now if we were to move our cat rig, what we'll do is just quickly add a new layer. Add a new layer and take our character out of setup pose. Now when we move the arm, we've got a few bones here which are bending instead of going straight. Whoop. Okay, so what might be a bit nicer is we're going to use an alignment constraint, an orientation constraint. So on this guy we're going to align it somewhere between the parent arm, this bone here, and the bone we've linked it to. And I believe now we need to put a list controller on this guy. Rotation list. Assign a oil XYZ controller. This will go back to our curve editor. The list constraint is so that we can apply an offset. So if we right click on that, double click and make that active, close that down. Now when we rotate this guy, we want to use local again, and with the angle snaps on just by 90 degrees. So we're rotating on the wrong angle, so I'm just going to use the curve editor. We basically want a rotation on the z-axis by 90 degrees. So create one keyframe and then type in a value of 90, and we've got it roughly right now. So now when we move this hand, put it back to shaded view, we got a bend going on, and we can control this bend by pulling out these guys. Now we just need to quickly do this whole process again, which I'm going to do as fast as I can. I'm cloning that point helper just so that we've used instances all the way along our arm. So if we want to resize or change these nulls, these point helpers, the whole arm will update as one. It really doesn't matter where we create these bones because they're all going to be realigned and repositioned anyway. So our initial positioning of these bones is being overridden as we add the new position constraints. Now, some of you may be wondering why we didn't just assign path constraints straight onto the bones. Well, the reason why is because we can't make a bone look at its child. That's a circular dependency. So we had to create all these point helpers so that now we can do this look at. And it's just a slightly tidier solution as well. So we put on the lookats. Get constraint. This might be a good time to turn off these viewing angles. View line lengths, I mean. Look at constraint, add target. And we should position constrain the nub off the end of the bone right onto the last point in the spline. And position target. So now if we control any of these control vertices, we have almost a working solution. All we need is to make sure that our bone is constrained to the correct thing. Look at. So we had accidentally constrained our bones to look at the control vertice instead of the one that's on the spline. So now one of the things I did before was relink this this point helper to be the child of that guy, and then when we move this guy, the whole spline behaves better. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is align that and use the align tool. Okay, so we're almost there. Right now we should just simply link the hand control object onto the hand and rotate it in local space in the correct axis. So I'm just aligning it roughly by eye. So what we have here now is a nice stretchy arm. When we whatever we do to this arm, undo that. Before we continue, we'll link our Okay, so we have a stretchy arm which is bendy, and the bendiness is controlled by these point helpers. So at this point, what I might suggest is that we take this layer of animation off our rig, but go to setup mode and right click on the bone and go add extra bone. What this does is it's given us a bone which we're going to use this bone to control our tangents on our bone. It's a cat bone, so it comes with a cat controller. Now if we just grab this guy, we're just going to quickly align the two. Okay, zoom in, F3. So we're going to just link our handles to the cat bone. Now what this means is the cat bone, for example, if we want to animate the bendiness of the arm throughout our animation, we can, and it will be part of the layer stack. So as we add new layers, that'll keep working. So the next thing we need to do is just add one more. I'm going to add it to this guy again, add bone, and resize him, and align him to. Okay. So we can actually make these control vertices now very, very small. So we select the spline, come down, and we'll make them 1 for now so we can still see them. And if we select the spline down here, it's getting hard to select. We'll make these ones 1 as well. And the other things that are cluttering up our user interface right now is these guys, so we'll make them 0.2. So they're still in the scene, they're just very, very small, and now we can see a better idea of what's going on. The first thing we need to do is grab this guy and add an extra bone, and he is going to control the incoming tangent. So let's find that incoming tangent, and actually we should align them together. Apply OK, and link it to our bone. So now during our animation we can actually change the bending of these arms. Now there's one thing you might have noticed is that the bones are all actually rolling around. Don't worry, I've thought of this. So this is where we do the final setup. For each of the bones they have a lookout constraint. What we're going to do, you might also remember that we have 4 bone segments in our cat bone, and these bone segments control how the arm twists. So if we add another layer, if we were to rotate this guy, we can see that the cat bone is actually controlling the twisting. So what we'd actually like to do is use the cat bones to in turn drive the twisting of this bone. So let's select the bone, go to the rotation channel, and go turn up node from world to bone, and we're going to select our cat bone. Now if we select the cat bone, we can see y-axis is pointing forward. If we select our bone, we're going to use the y-axis to y-axis alignment, and do this for all the bones. We can press page down to navigate down our hierarchy, and use Y to Y. Now what's nice about this is you can see the bones are starting to become very nicely aligned. We can ignore this nub bone. In fact, what we should do is make him kind of small so we can't see him, because this bone is actually the bone we'll be using as our elbow bone. So yes, working our way down, we press that and use Y to Y. Actually, I believe Z to Z would be equally as good, but I've chosen to use Y to Y. So that we turned off world. Okay. Okay, so now we have all the controls set up. As we move this arm around, we've got a nice bendy arm. We've got controls over how the bending happens. Before we continue, we'll just add our final control. So I select the upper arm and right click on it and go add extra bone. And this bone is once again going to be controlling the tangents. So we can move him down and grab this control object and actually align him to our new cat bone. And link him to the cat bone. So what's nice about the solution, as I was pointing out earlier, is that as we twist up our arm, the twisting is actually of these cat bones is actually driving the twisting of the max bones due to the fact that we've used the up node vector. What that means is if we decide to change this twist interpolation graph, actually it's going to change the actual max bones as well. It should be. Let's just check that we got this right. Yes, have to remember to turn off art world. So now let's just check that twisting graph again. It's running a little bit slow because of all the updates that have to happen, but actually playing with the rig is still quite fast. So yes, we've got a very customizable solution here. So let's just, now what we need to do is make these control objects a little bit more manipulatable. So we should right click on them and go add gizmo. The gizmo thing we're going to add is just a, we'll just use a circle for now, and it's going to be outside of the bone. We can effectively hide these bones that we're not going to be actually using. Just for now we'll hide them. I'm sure you can see a nice way of doing that. We're going to select our cat bone, add a gizmo, use the circle again, add a gizmo, cancel that. So right now we have our bendy arm with all the control you could want from a bendy arm system. And yet you still have IK. So for example, if we were to, I have just done a few movements while I was in setup mode. However, that's fine. We got away with it. So we should hide anything we don't really want to be selecting. So all these control objects that we now are actually controlling using our cat bones, we should try to hide them. So we'll basically put them on a layer that's unselectable. So this guy controls the upper arm. Obviously you can use this technique to do many things, like bendy tails, or so add a new layer. I'm going to take the character out of setup pose, come down here, create an IK target, select the IK target, and we're going to put the arm into IK just so we can move things around. And you can see the system's very responsive, and we have a lot of control. And that's the end of this little video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned some things about Max and Cat at the same time. Thank you for watching.